Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News. I'm joined, as always, by Travis Reier, the longtime senior analyst at BamaOnline.com, newly of the On3 network. And the Talkin Tide podcast, of course, available to you wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts. And, of course, you can catch us live on YouTube and Facebook as well. Give us a like and or a subscribe in those locales. And of course, on Twitter, the handle is Talkin_Tide. You can get links to all of our podcasts right there on that Twitter feed. So give that a follow as well. The Talkin Tide podcast, as always, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa. We'll hear more about Peterbrook a little bit later in the program. Travis, though, we kind of rejoin here at the beginning of July. We've had a couple weeks off here on the podcast. It's been basically dead for hard news on the Alabama athletics front of late for the most part. But football wise, certainly one of the latest stories of note is the apparent departure of Jamil Burroughs, the Alabama defensive tackle, who apparently reportedly is looking to transfer. There's some reports he was actually in the portal. I'm not quite sure how that works because the portal window closed on April 30th. Maybe that's just Jamil's way of saying I'm going to hit the portal as soon as I can. I don't know. But looks like Jamil's moving on.
It does. And a guy who flashed, at different stages of his career, and you kind of thought maybe this could be the year for him to step forward. Although you did understand that Alabama was bringing back Jaheim Otis on the nose. And I think Justin Aboigbe coming back for that fifth year kind of pushed Jamil back a little bit too, going into 2023. And, Tim Smith obviously in that mix. But again, a guy that as much as anything flash, just hadn't been able to really put it together over an extended stretch. Couple different times in his stretch with Alabama, you thought, well, this might be where he, picks it up, especially after Aboigbe went out last season. But he's a little bit of a tweener too. Is he a nose tackle? Is he an end? I think he's package specific. He can give you some interior pass rush. And I say all this, and I think there'll be a market for Jamil Burroughs. I mean, the value for that position and those kind of guys, even though it didn't really go according to plan for him at Alabama, Chase Hill, I can see him laying in at a Power 5 somewhere. He kind of has Colorado maybe on him a little bit. Smells a little bit like maybe a Colorado guy, maybe. I don't have any intel, but that's the type of that's the type of move I could see anyway for Jamil Burroughs.
There's been a coach or two to head that way from Tuscaloosa, so it wouldn't be surprising. You mentioned he's a little bit of a tweener. I think you're right about that. I think you look at a guy like Jamil Burroughs, and he's a tall guy. He's got length, and of course that's a plus at pretty much any position, and it can help you in pass rush for sure. Help you knock down passes at the line of scrimmage. The flip side of that, Travis, though, is if you're a pure DT or a pure nose tackle and you're tall and long, it can be difficult for you to get leverage on a center or a guard who's got a little bit on you in terms of power, but is built a little lower to the ground. And so I think that's kind of what makes a guy like Burroughs a little bit of a tweener as far as inside versus outside.
Yeah, this again, a guy that at times was disruptive. You even saw in the A-Day game. He caused some problems working with that second team defense, and a guy that could help those linebackers get freed up to make some plays, because there were times where you needed to account for him with multiple blockers. He could take on blocks and keep those guys clean behind him. But again, a little bit of a shame that it just never truly came together for Jamil at Alabama. And you wish him well and hope it works out wherever he ends up.
All right, Travis, moving on. The next topic, the NCAA. We're going broader here. Certainly impacts Alabama like it does any other major college athletics program. But we're shooting out to 30,000 feet now, basically talking NCAA and NIL. The NCAA puts out a memo to all member schools this past week, basically amounts as a warning shot on NIL, saying this is allowed, this is not. And not only that, but, and this, I thought this was pretty bold, and I can't wait to see if it can be backed up. But the memo says, Travis, we don't care what the state law says. You're going to do what we tell you to do. And if you don't, watch out. I mean, that's what I took from it. I don't know how any school could take anything else from it. It basically says, look, this is your membership in the NCAA is voluntary. And because it's voluntary, you're going to go by all our rules. If you don't like them, then I guess you can move out, as the message that's being sent. But the NCAA at the same time has been beaten in court on this topic and others routinely enough, Travis, that you wonder if this is all bark and zero bite.
Well, I'll tell you where it's all bark is, you kind of alluded to it. Enforcement. They've been saying this, right? And how much has it really slowed down some schools of note, some programs of note, some athletic departments of note, in terms of as a recruiting enticement? Not so much once the student athletes get on campus, enroll, get involved in these programs. Come and get us is essentially what the member schools, some of them, have said. And I don't blame them, to be honest with you, because the NCAA for a long time now has not been able to adequately enforce its own rules. So, why is that? How's that going to change with more to enforce? They have more than ever to try to enforce now with NIL. And it's largely the membership's fault because they weren't proactive. They allowed the toothpaste to get out of the tube, and now they're trying to do whatever they can to get it back. It's out the gate in 88 when it comes to NIL and these things, Chase.
There's no doubt. And the trend, and I wrote about this for the Tuscaloosa News here on Sunday. The trend has gone like this. Like 2 years ago, the birthday of NIL is celebrating its second birthday this weekend, right? It's exactly 2 years old is the NIL era. And when it launched 2 summers ago, you had lots of states they had laws ready to rock, already passed and basically enacted on day one for NIL. Most of those laws dealt with guardrails for athletes and schools, right? And some states didn't have a law at all, which you obviously you could do that as well. Well, over the course of 6 to 12 months, as college football and basketball got a lay of the land, college athletics in general, well, then the sentiment became, why do we have a law at all, right? Because the law we got puts us in a bad spot compared to this other state over here that's got no law at all. So let's repeal. That's what Alabama did. Alabama repealed its law after about 7 months. It was only on the books for about 7 months. They're like, forget this law. Somebody, these other states are doing better than we are. Let's just throw this law out. Let's go with no law. Well, that's fine. That's what that was the trend for a while. That's great. Well, now, Travis, the new laws that are coming in they don't police schools and athletes. They're policing the NCAA. You look at the Missouri law that just got passed this past May, and it's not the only one. You read these laws now that are coming into place, they say very little about what schools can and can't. They say a lot about what schools can do, very little, if anything, about what they can't do. And same with the athletes, but they specifically make it illegal for any entity, whether it's the SEC or a conference or the NCAA, to punish their schools or athletes or even investigate. The Missouri law says you can't even investigate. And by the way, the Missouri law also, Travis, brings high school players into NIL revenue as long as they sign with an in-state school. So now you've got these laws coming in,
they're
and Missouri's
at the
just
state. Yeah, at the state level,
one example, Travis. But
they're providing almost inducements like the University of Missouri would, for in-state kids
no
to stay
doubt, no
in-state.
doubt.
And look,
And the bottom, but the main point is, and it's instead of putting a fence around what can be done by schools and athletes, they're putting a fence around what the NCAA can do. So it's going to be interesting to see if Alabama decides to go ahead and do a new law or something.
Probably the biggest winners in all this are attorneys, right? Because yes. it's in the courts where this will be mostly bantied about. I mean, it's already reached
Billable
DC.
Hours.
Yes, yeah. The big one is.
Yes. I get reports that Tuberville Joe Manchin NIL bill might be coming down the pike here in, fairly soon. And that, who knows if that goes anywhere. The federal
Manchin's like Saban's best friend, or has been in the past. I mean, they grew up together. They're pals, So
Saban's got Manchin's ear. There's no doubt. Yeah. He's probably got Manchin's ear as much or more than he's got Tuberville's ear, I would think, because like you said, they go further back than Saban and Tuberville by probably a lot.
No, yeah, I mean, you're going back to youth, I think, with Manchin. In West Virginia.
We will see what they come up with. I don't expect federal legislation. We've touched on this before. I don't see Congress getting together on this. They can't get together on anything else. I don't know why they would on this subject. But the variance of state laws continues to be this carousel of advantage versus disadvantage for all schools.
But what about the aspect of what qualifies as an employee? Or, the tax man, I think, at some point could have a real interest in this at the federal level.
Yes. And I think there are lawsuits pending that deal with employee status and tax status, some of that kind of stuff. And if those, and basically those are the lawsuits, the concept of amateurism has already basically been destroyed, but it's still on kind of a last leg, I guess, Travis. And these lawsuits now that are going to deal with employee status and tax status, that's the last leg, right? I mean, if it doesn't go right for the NCAA on those lawsuits, then the amateur model's 100% out the window if it isn't already. And away we go for a brand new era in college sports. It's a new era every year, it seems like, at least lately.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up. Absolutely. No doubt about it.
All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Continuing on, again, the Twitter feed is Talkin_Tide. Give us a quick follow there. We'd appreciate that. Sponsored, of course, by Peterbrook Chocolatier. Travis, tell them about it.
Peterbrook Chocolatier right there in Tuscaloosa, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa specifically. Hey, still got those camps at Peterbrook Chocolatier. We're about halfway through the summer. Crazy, I know, in terms of kids and those summer months and trying to plug some holes on that calendar for the kiddies. 205-752-0211. Give them a call. They'll get you set up with the summer camps as they continue to roll on at Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. It is getting hot too, by the way. It is hot. It isn't getting hot. And so a great way to cool down also, that outstanding gelato there at Peterbrook Chocolatier. Nice assortment of flavors, handcrafted. You're going to love that as well. Gelato at Peterbrook Chocolatier right there, Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Yeah, one of the best things about that Peterbrook Chocolatier summer camp right now, Travis, in Tuscaloosa is air conditioning, right?
Yeah,
because it's 100 degrees outside all week long. It has just been awful heat in Tuscaloosa this week for sure. And Peterbrook will get you in that nice AC to make that chocolate. The kids love it. They have a great time. I've seen them. They just absolutely have a blast with it. And it beats the outdoor camp and the cabin with a fan with no AC. Yeah, that's a lot. That Peterbrook summer camp's a lot better.
Yeah, in a canoe, in a mosquito-infested lake or something, Yeah, no doubt. Give me Peterbrook.
Love it. All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Moving on just a few more minutes in this abbreviated edition of Talkin Tide. Travis, not a whole lot to talk about. We're going to hit that too deep tumbler in a few minutes like we typically do. One other newsy note, though, Cam Robinson, the former Alabama left offensive tackle in a long time now, I guess. He's been with the Jags a long time Jacksonville Jaguar, hit with a 4-game suspension for performance enhancing drugs. You and I, being Jacksonville natives, Jaguars guys, this comes up on our radar a little bit louder than it might if an Alabama was playing for some other club in the NFL. But what are your thoughts on Cam Rob and what this does to the Jags offense going into 2023?
Well, the Jags get one former Alabama player back from suspension in Calvin Ridley and have another one go on in Cam Robinson. So that's kind of the way it's working right now for the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. They took a first-round tackle in this latest draft too, Anton Harrison from Oklahoma, Chase, which could be a foreshadowing of what's to come big picture wise. But, depending on how Harrison performs here and the how he has looked so far in OTAs and then going into camp and through camp, obviously once Cam's good to go, he's going to be back in there. But you don't like to see it, obviously. I mean, you want to see him on the field. He's made some nice money to this point in his career, but he could have another nice size to big deal in front of him. Just a matter of health, which he struggled with a little bit in the past too. But it's tough for the Jags because they're set up offensively, especially to be upper echelon in the National Football League in 2023. But this doesn't help with that. And just want to see him get back on the field as quickly as possible. And I'm sure Trevor Lawrence does, that's his guy on his blind side there. So tough news, but not entirely unexpected. This had been coming for a while.
Puts a little bit of heat on Walker Little too, right? The Jaguars offensive tackle from Stanford, who's been in the pros now, I guess, a couple of years, 3 years.
They lost Jawan Taylor to free agency too in the offseason. So yeah.
Yes. Yep. So we'll see what happens with that. That you got to be able to run it you got to be able to protect Lawrence. You got to be able to run it too. We'll see what happens with the running game. I really think it starts there. But definitely
Travis Etienne. I mean, they got a guy at running back that can do it.
Yep.
I like the pick of Tank Bigsby there in the 3rd round or so at the running back position to go along with Etienne now. Offensive line has improved, but if there's been a bugaboo for the Jags in recent years, it's been that group as a whole. And so this doesn't help, obviously.
Going to be real interesting, as you noted, to see if Calvin Ridley bounces back to that Falcons form that he had a few years ago. He was I think his best year with the Falcons was like a 1,300 or 1,400 yard receiving season. So he was, what's such a shame about what happened with Ridley, it's not just what he did, but he did it right when his career was hitting a hell of a peak. Yeah. And so now he's basically looking at a 1.5 or 2-year layoff, whatever it is. And it's going to be fun to see how he rebounds.
Yeah, it was tough, I think, at the time, catching up with him and some of the stuff that's been reported since. Calvin, apparently, from a mental health perspective, was in a pretty dark place that it sort of culminated with all of this. So, obviously, you don't want to see a player in his prime lose a year unpaid. But who knows? Maybe that break in some other ways helped Calvin to sort of reset and sounds like he's good to go and energized and ready to do some good things. They got Christian Kirk at one of the wide receiver spots. They got some weapons to go along with him. So the opportunity is certainly great for him right now.
All right, before we get out of here on the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network, we are going to hit that two deep tumbler really quickly, like we've been doing throughout the summer. We're going to give it a twirl here, right here. You can hear that tumbler go. As we know, that the tumbler's got a mind of its own. Sometimes you want two out of it, and it gives you four. But we'll see if we can see.
Powerball.
This time it gave us two. That'll work.
That's the closest you're going to get to the lotto in the state of Alabama, by the way. This right here. This is it.
No question about it. All right, the two balls that came out of the tumbler here. Number 26 comes out, Jam Miller, the backup running back. We'll discuss him a little bit real quick. And as well, what else comes out here? Number 45 comes out as well, Robbie Oots, the tight end. So thoughts, Travis, on these two guys? We call it the two deep tumbler for a reason, right? I'm not talking about a couple of star players here, but Miller, a guy, Travis, who's flashed in fourth quarter action. We really haven't seen him at the running back step spot much in crunch time. Oots, a guy who you will see early in games here and there, kind of on a rotational basis as a tight end. Kind of a fair to call him a Baron Huber type, I guess. I mean, he's not a Y really. He kind of seems like more of an H, but Nick Saban's got room for that guy on his roster, at least one or two of them.
Well, if this is really going to be more about more tight ends and more pounding the rock, I think it's pretty appropriate that you drew those two guys together, because you talk about guys that could benefit more from a direct run approach instead of maybe east and west as much as we saw, especially last season, because that really suited Jahmyr Gibbs, right? That really suited Jace McClellan in some ways, what we saw a year ago, how Alabama ran the football with the outside zone and that type of stuff. But it looks like this is going to be more of a direct run type of situation, and so I would think for Jam Miller, watching him and kind of having a little bit of an idea of his running style, I think it's good for him. I think it's good for a guy like Roydell Williams. I think Jam can do a little bit of everything. Don't get me wrong. But when I watch him, there's efficiency in his running style. He's decisive. He gets northwest. He gets north-south. I feel the same way about Roydell. And then for Robbie Oots, I mean, if you're going to go with more 12 personnel or a good bit of it, which, they've done that in the past, even before Tommy Rees, he would seem to complement CJ Dupree pretty well in terms of how they could use him off the ball, maybe online a little bit, in line a little bit. But what do you think, Chase? I think these are a couple of guys that you drew them out right on time when you consider this offense and where it might be headed.
They come out in interesting pairs out of that two deep tumbler, Travis. Remember last time we podcasted, we pulled Tyler Booker and Jaheim Otis together. Perfect pair right there. A couple of same class, right? Sophomores, you young linemen on the squad on either side of the ball, and here we get Miller and Noah's Ark coming out of the tumbler. It's going to give us Milroe and Simpson next week, right out of there. But Oots, I think you'll see more of Oots early in the season than you will Miller. I think because again, the 12 personnel, I think Tommy Rees is going to use tight ends a little bit more, not a ton more, but maybe a little bit more. And so you'll see a little bit more of that 12 look. You'll see a little bit more. But for a guy like Jam Miller, though, you don't expect to see a guy like that so much in September, right? Unless he can happen to crack the two deep, which I think is probably unlikely. But wait till November, Travis, right? When you got a running back out and another one who pulls a hamstring and is questionable. It's late in the year where all of a sudden you need somebody like Jam Miller to help in a big way.
Yeah, five running backs are too many in August, but they're not enough usually in November. You're like, remember in November, you're thinking, remember in August when everyone's saying, man, I don't know how they're going to feed these guys. And then you're down to like a back and a half in mid-November, like they've been, it seems like in recent years. So absolutely. And this isn't to imply what I'm talking about with Jam Miller in terms of what I like about him, that he is plodding or doesn't have good speed. Now, in comparison to Jameer Gibbs, yeah. I mean, I get it as far as you're not going to have that kind of guy in the backfield this season. But again, relative to what you're sort of anticipating them doing more of with this group, I think the backs they have, including Jam Miller, it sets up pretty nicely for them.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. We are coming up on the 4th of July. And of course, a couple weeks after that, we're looking at SEC Media Days. So the turn of the season is kind of sort of approaching, I guess, Travis. But what about the holiday? What are you going to be doing with the fam on the 4th on Tuesday?
Pretty standard. I think it's going to be burgers and dogs, probably, with maybe some brats mixed in there on the grill. A little pool time, getting the family together. We got the oldest daughter coming in from Hawaii, so that'll be good.
Nice.
You know how it is, man, with 3 kids that are adult age now. If you get 2 of the 3 together, that feels like a win. A lot of times, you get even 2 of the 3 at home together, you feel like, wow, that's pretty good. So that's about what we're looking at. What about you? I mean, are you gonna have the fireworks? Are you gonna light up Lake Crest? Is it gonna be light up Lake Crest with the
That's a perfect
Goodbread?
segue, talking about getting 2 out of the 3 kids, because I got 3 kids myself. Of course, you and I have
Right.
both have 3, and they're roughly the same ages. We're going to have a pretty standard 4th around the house. Yeah, I'm sure I'll get out on that grill and do something, and maybe rip off a few firecrackers. Only one of our children in town for the 4th, however. But
That's what
then
I'm
on the
saying. It's
5th,
tough.
yeah, but then I go on vacation immediately following, and we're going to run down to Belize, which is
Nice.
a place you've been, I think, yourself. I've
Highly
never been,
recommend. Oh yeah.
and we're going to get down there with 2 of our 3 kids. Our oldest and our middle child are going to join us down there for about 4 days, and I think we're going to get back on July 9th. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's a fun trip, and it's easier than you think. You got airlines like Southwest that go into Belize City, and it's not a hard trip, and yeah, you guys are gonna have a blast, man, no doubt.
Looking forward to it. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. For Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News and co-host of Crimson Cover Television. And we'll talk to you next time right here on Talkin Tide.